So yes, today I'll be talking about inverting the status quo for legacy applications and desktop containers with added roller coasters. So I should probably start off by saying what the status quo is that I think I'm inverting. I'm going to talk about my favorite 90s TV show, The Outer Limits. I'm going to talk about, roller coasters. It would be disingenuous not to. And I guess kind of sum up what we've learnt at the end. So the status quo. I'm assuming that a lot of people listening today are responsible in some way for code that's running on users' desktops. And generally, they're in the privileged, shall we say, position of having legacy applications to deal with. They probably made the decision a little while ago that they want to move over to a web content and pushing web content for users. And generally, they'll be on some kind of migration journey from a legacy app to this web content. They definitely want to be going in that direction. They want to be investing in the web content in whatever runtime it lives in, a browser, a desktop container, progressive web app, what have you. They want to not be investing in the legacy app. They do want to be investing in the web technology, and they don't want to be going back in the other direction. Although I guess I want to introduce the idea that maybe people are without realizing that's what they're doing. So when people have kind of made the decision to move from legacy apps to web apps, generally you always need a technique to move from one to the other. And there's kind of three main techniques I'm familiar with. One, which is now thankfully long forgotten, is the wait and see migration technique. So obviously there's very little short-term cost in that, but there's a lot of long-term risk. And I think a lot of people have now decided that's not a viable technique. There's also the Big Bang migration technique. Again, I don't think this one's hugely popular anymore, but it's the idea that you could just invest a lot of money up front in completely rewriting your application for the web. And you then have the issues of when you go to launch, the risk involved with a completely new platform. So instead, most people opt for what I'm calling the desktop strangler fig migration technique. So some of you might be familiar with the strangler fig kind of migration or strategy when it's applied to microservices. This is essentially the same thing that everybody's doing on the desktop. If you're not familiar with the terminology, I think you'll probably be familiar with the technique itself. So the way it normally works is that you have your legacy app, which is running on a user's desktop. You have your web content, or you set up a way for your web content to run on the user's desktop alongside it, and you establish some kind of messaging substrate between the two. You then look at your legacy application and you try and slice it up into kind of its functional blocks. You use some kind of prioritization heuristic to choose which functional blocks to move over first, which will deliver the most value as web content, and you move them over one by one. You have them talking to each other via the messaging substrate, so the user gets a seamless experience, but it kind of reduces your upfront investment and de-risks the deployment of the functionality. This is a great technique. I have no problem with this technique. I'm not trying to push people away from this technique. I guess my concern with it is how this normally ends up being implemented, or is commonly implemented. And that's this kind of situation. So the legacy app's already deployed to the user's desktop, and we have this new web content, and we want the two to talk to each other. And we decide that actually we'll put the web content within a frame in the existing legacy application. And it makes sense. I understand why people do it. It's probably not what people would choose with all the options, but due to the constraints they have, this is what ends up happening. And it's unideal. But equally, it can be tricky to see how you could reverse that relationship. Ooh. I worked very hard on that animation and we skipped it. But it would be much better if we could see the legacy app as the child. If the legacy app was beholden to the web content, if the web content was essentially in charge and ruling the roost. But how can we set this situation up? Thankfully, we don't have applets anymore. We don't have plugins to worry about in the browser. But actually, that's kind of what we want, that functionality where we could embed the legacy app into into kind of our web content. So how could we go about doing that using modern technology? So here is an example. Wait, first live demo has come up. Here is a Windows XP virtual machine, but this is actually being streamed into my browser. So as you can see, I'm in Chrome. I would open the DevTools, but no one needs to see the warnings that are coming out of my coding. But yeah, we can interact with this like, well, I guess like it was a virtual machine. Now, under the hood, this is what's going on. This talk isn't going to get into the details of it. The only important piece to know for now is that the virtual machine is being streamed into a canvas element in the browser. So it's purely web content by the time we're seeing it and interacting with it in the browser. There'll be a blog post up shortly on the Scholargic blog, which will cover the kind of the details and more of the technical side of things if that's what you're interested in. For the rest of this talk, I want to concentrate on the benefits or the potential of these techniques. So I want to do that using, my favorite 90s TV show, The Outer Limits. So for those unfamiliar with the Outer Limits, I would probably consider it now, it's probably a cheap 90s version of Black Mirror. It's the kind of thing that used to absolutely terrify me as a 10-year-old. It would have me hiding behind the cushions on the sofa. The thing that always stands out to me, I can't actually remember any of the episode details anymore, so I probably shouldn't recommend it. But it's the narrator. When the narrator would introduce it, he'd come on and he'd have a really kind of booming voice, and they'd play through these credits. And I think they actually set up a nice story for us to tell this kind of migration technique story with. So paraphrased, he said something like this: "We control the horizontal and the vertical. We can deluge you with 1,000 legacy apps or expand one single app to crystal clarity and beyond." Obviously, he did a lot better than me, but you get the gist, and he wasn't really chatting about legacy apps. I've cheated a little bit there. But let's dig into some of those lines, because I think they're interesting and we can apply them to what we're doing. So we control the horizontal and the vertical. Well, in the case of this application that we've got here, it would actually be nice if, given we're only trying to expose maybe the calculator functionality, we didn't have to have the whole of the rest of it. Like real estate's valuable on trader desktops. So yeah, why don't we control the horizontal and the vertical? It's just a canvas element, we can just chop it down. So now that we control the horizontal and the vertical, we can deluge you with 1,000 legacy apps. That truly is the stuff of nightmares. That's not something I want to get into. So we'll skip that one. Or expand one single app to crystal clarity. So these days, when we think about crystal clarity, we're probably thinking about the clarity of the user experience and how we can make it very obvious to people what's going on with our application. In the case of the calculator, you might think it's already a relatively straightforward user experience in it. It kind of is, but I think we can do better. Things that kind of concern me about using the calculator are the memory buttons. Whilst I know roughly what their functionality is, it's not intuitive enough to me that I would feel confident clicking them in the middle of a complex calculation. To be honest, I would probably just use the clipboard if I wanted to save a value. So let's get rid of the memory buttons. And while we're there, what the heck is the difference between the C button and the C button? Any time I've ever tried to press one or the other, I've ended up just pressing both. I still to this day don't know the difference, even after reading the help file. So why don't we just merge those buttons into one actually useful button that does what we want it to? So now that we've expanded the app to kind of a much nicer user experience, why don't we take it beyond? This is just web content. Why don't we have it interacting with some other web content? So we got rid of the memory stuff, but actually the memory stuff was quite useful. Why don't we re-implement it using what I consider in my very poor UX design skills to be a better a better experience. So here we go, we can kind of use values from our stack over here and push them into our legacy app, get a new result, and then save them. That to me is a much cleaner experience. Equally, can we take it further? Can we go more beyond? Well, of course we can. It's just web content. So having it as 2 windows sets up this kind of artificial barrier. There's nothing stopping us just bringing them together. Why don't we have it as one seamless piece of content? Again, my UX skills aren't really up there. I'm sure a much better integration and cleaner integration could be built, but I think this demonstrates it. We can freely interact between web content down here, as exemplified by the fact that I can highlight it, the stalwart of the web world. But yeah, I can interact with the native content and I can save values back. So with this technique, not only can we host legacy apps, which is essentially just app virtualization, but the killer thing about this is we can remix them. And when we remix them, we can expose functionality or hone in on functionality that's hidden deep within an app. And we can do that all with web technology. This is the technology we want to invest in. We're not having to put any effort into our legacy technologies. So now, I guess the thing we've all been waiting for, roller coasters. And how do roller coasters figure into this? Well, I think it might help to have another example. I think the example that I've run through at the minute has been a calculator. It's relatively abstract. And actually, re-implementing a calculator isn't too tricky. Re-implementing a roller coaster, maybe less so. So I'm sure, like a lot of people listening, I've like worked on, I've also used my fair share of trading applications. To my mind, though, there's one missing feature, missing from all of them, a feature that I personally find really useful when making my trading decisions. Live ticking feeds are everywhere, historic pricing charts at 10 a penny, and technical analysis is commoditized, yet they're all missing one trick, 3 key metrics, which I think are fundamental to a prudent investment decision. The excitement, intensity, and nausea rating of an instrument's price history chart as measured by Rollercoaster Tycoon. That's the correct reaction. So what am I on about? Rollercoaster Tycoon 2 is, for me, almost a prototypically legacy application. It has some surface level features that make it legacy. So things that would really stop us putting it on a trader's desktop, like it being designed to run full screen on Windows XP with a low resolution and a tiny color depth. Like that makes it impossible just at a pure functional level to run on a trader desktop. But for me, the thing as a developer that scares me more is the non-functional side of it. This was hand-coded in assembler by one developer who last worked on it 21 years ago. What? That's the kind of legacy I don't want to go anywhere near. So how can we use this technique to build in that case? So bear with me while I just tee up the next demo. There's a few screen clicky things to do here. There we go. And this one. Ooh. There we go. Cool. Right. Apologies for the off-screenness. So let me introduce you to my trading application. This is the trading application that I've always wanted to build myself. Again, I'm not great at UX. So we've got our watch list. Our watch list has a set of shares. It's got all the typical metrics you'd expect, but then here we've got excitement, intensity, and nausea. And you can notice we've got a very ominous looking run advanced analysis button for our Tesla share price. We also got a chart here showing the relative performance of the pricing data I've got. So why don't we try running the advanced analysis for Tesla? Right, so what's going to happen here is we've actually kicked off Rollercoaster Tycoon, or a segment of it, in this nested window in the canvas here. And it's going to build out for us a roller coaster where the track actually matches the price history of Tesla at the time I captured this. Disclaimer, it's quite hard at such a low resolution of track pieces to create something that looks similar to it, but I think that's a good enough approximation. Certainly I'd be willing to put my money into this. So here we go. We're setting, you've noticed it's not a loop, it's a launch roller coaster. So we're firing off at 60 miles an hour. We're chasing down the track, and we're going to go up to the top. Hopefully we don't go off the top. No, here we go. We're coming back down again. And I guess, yeah, this is reflective of pricing or trading in general, because any price that goes up is going to come down, or some tortured link like that. So here we go. We're hurling back into the station. We'll get some preliminary stats in. And there we go. We've just got through our excitement, intensity, and nausea rating. And we can pull it back into the app. And there, yeah, we can see that Tesla, investing in Tesla is going to be an extremely exciting, extremely intense ride. But yeah, it's probably fair to say it's going to be quite nauseating as well. I think that reflects most people's investment experience of Tesla. So jumping back, I think it's kind of worth considering and looking back on what some of the pros and cons, now that we've seen a couple of examples of this technique. The first two pros are the same pros that you get with anything where you are using VM infrastructure. So you can run the app without deployment. It's secure by default because it's running in the VM. Equally, the novel thing here is that we're able to remix legacy apps using web technology. We can add novel functionality. Conversely, there's VM infrastructure required for each, and the remote lag might not be suitable. I guess 9 months ago, maybe we were considering that VMs and remote lag was an insurmountable issue. I think the last 9 months have taught us a lot, but probably that these issues aren't as big a deal as we thought. Equally, the novel thing here is that remix code can quickly become complex, but it's probably important to remember that in the vast majority of cases, the remix code is only meant to be a little bit of an off-ramp to rewriting that functionality for the web anyway. So there shouldn't be a long-term maintenance burden there. The final thing I'd like to leave you with is a quote that features on the description of the Strangler Fig pattern website. And I think it's very pertinent to the discussion about migration to the web. When designing a new application, you should design it in such a way as to make it easier for it to be strangled in the future. Let's face it, all we are doing is writing tomorrow's legacy software today. Now, as much as I'd like to disagree with Martin Fowler about this, because I really do think the web is a great platform. Unfortunately, he does have history on his side. And in all likelihood, there's no getting away from whatever we create today is going to become someone else's problem in the future. And I think the least we can do to help that poor set of people that come after us is to ensure that we've consolidated on a single technology. So using the techniques we've talked about in this talk is a one way of kind of getting towards that target state in a much quicker way. I'd encourage you to go and check out the Scott blog if you haven't already. There's lots of technically interesting stuff on there. And as I said, I will put up the details of this talk later. I should also point out that no developers were harmed in the making of this talk. Everything that I've demonstrated was achieved without any development on the legacy applications. It was all done using web technology. Thank you.